Welcome back to the Impact Storytelling Podcast. I'm your host, Sabine, and today I'm joined by marine conservationist, researcher, educator, and scientific diver Juliette Villechanoux. Juliette is a French marine conservationist, currently serving as the field and science project manager for Coral Guardian, a French NGO that works internationally with local communities to protect coral ecosystems. She has a wealth of experience, having worked on coral research and conservation projects around the world. From studying how shark diving influences coral reefs in Fiji to researching red corals in Italy. Welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to talk about all things coral with you. To start, you grew up by the sea in Brazil. Did your upbringing inspire your career in marine conservation?
Yeah, hi everyone. Very excited to talk about corals today here. So yes, I did grow up in Brazil, and although I didn't live by the sea all the time, we went there very often, almost every weekend, and it contributed a lot, I think, to my passion for the water, as well as seeing my family and my dad, especially spearfishing and bringing me in the water, always playing by the ocean. I always had a strong link with what lived underneath the surface, and I always wanted to explore and played games, how long I can hold my breath, how long I can swim far down, and things like this. So I think it definitely played a huge part on who I am today.
That sounds like a really nice upbringing. Your current role as the field and science project manager for Coral Guardian sounds fascinating. What does your role involve, and what is the mission of Coral Guardian as an organization?
So if people don't know, Coral Guardian is a French NGO, but that works worldwide to restore and protect coral reefs by working hand in hand with local communities. So what we do is that we have partnerships with local projects that want to restore reefs. And at the moment, we're in Indonesia. That was our pilot project. So since 2015, almost 10 years. In Spain, which is quite unique because we restore Mediterranean coral reefs. It's quite unknown, and as well now in Kenya since 2024, so tropical reefs as well. So in Coral Guardian, we really have this vision of giving the power to local communities instead of us going there, but it doesn't mean that we don't help and we don't work with them. So my role as a field project manager is to really be with them every week. I'm the one exchanging with them. I'm the one also getting information and implementing, okay, what do we do next? What is needed? And also taking all this information back to our team in France. So doing the link between both teams, and as well going on the field, seeing how everything is going, implementing the science we want to implement, restoration methods. So Coral Guardian really is here to give our expertise and also finance all the projects, and that's what I do. And we already restored more than 75,000 corals since the beginning of our NGO, so that's a lot, and touched more than 12,000 people through all the different projects.
That's amazing. That's a lot of corals and sounds like a really great mission.
Yes.
After earning your bachelor's degree and volunteering in the Philippines, you pursued an Erasmus Master's in Marine Resources. For your final project, you studied red corals in Italy. Can you tell us more about that project and this specific coral species? For example, what was the goal of the project? What were your tasks? And why is this coral so unique?
Yes, the red coral is not so known. We mostly know it because we can buy it. So if you don't know what red coral is a beautiful, what we call a coralguardian. So it's a type of corals that we have. It's more like as a soft coral. People know soft corals. So coralguardian is a branch of soft corals. And it's present mostly in the Mediterranean Sea. And it's famous because of its vibrant red color that when you take out of the water stays like this and shiny, and then people make jewelry out of it. So that's the red coral, but it's all over the place in the Mediterranean Sea. But unfortunately, because it's heavily harvested and taken by people, we need to find ways on how we can restore it. So my project was studying different transportation methods, techniques, to make it grow again in the sea. But it's very challenging because it's a type of coral that usually grows upside down. So normally corals, it's like a tree, you know, they grow like a tree, like a plant, and they grow upwards. But the red coral, it likes to like grow in caves and crevices. And so then it grows more like from top to bottom, which makes it hard when you want to plant it, because usually what we do is you take like a little glue and then you stick the coral on it. But to put a glue on upside down, then it can fall before it gets hard. So it's like we can see, yes. And it's the whole challenge of the project was to find a way to make the glue stick until it hardens and the coral to stay. So my supervisor, I worked with the university in Italy, and they already tried different methods, and then my job was to see which one was best. So it was really interesting. We managed to dive to collect some fragments and see the methods. And conclusion was that you could maybe put a little PVC grade to make it hold in place, to make the coral stay on top. There was a bit of loss, but it was still doable. But it's still projects that need to be more talked about, because yes, it's quite quite difficult to plant these types of coral.
Yeah. And how big were the fragments that you used and tried to like glue back on upside down?
Yeah, it was quite small fragments because so the red coral, as most of all the gorgons in the Mediterranean Sea, they grow very slow. The red corals grow only 1 centimeter per year, more or less, when it's adult. So imagine it's really, really small. And the fragments we had were about, 5 centimeters to maybe 10 max. Not even, very, very, very small. So they were taken out from mother colonies, colonies that already existed there. And we just took little fragments.
As you said, the red corals have been extensively harvested for jewelry because they retain their color even after they die. And sadly, this has caused their populations in the Mediterranean Sea to decline drastically. I remember trying to film them in Corsica and asking where I can find them, and they're telling me they used to be very abundant, but now they're mostly found below 35 meters, and they're very small, and usually they don't take divers there, but because I was making a conservation film, they took me there, and I could see how small they are. I feel like oftentimes the people that buy the jewelry, they don't really have the connection between the jewelry and coral, and they don't think what they're doing with their consumerism by buying that there is a direct link to the destructions of these corals. So I think, there needs to be some communication work to be done to, show that more.
Most people don't know. I didn't even know until I started my my study. I know my mom has a big piece of jewelry like this, and when I told her, she was like, "Oh yeah, that's where it's from." And you don't make the link until you actually read it. It's so deep rooted in custom, society, culture, and so yeah. But about what you said, that in Corsica they used to have more, and now it's hard to find. That's because people go deeper and deeper to harvest them, because they take all the big colonies and then there's only small colonies. So they have to go deeper and deeper. Nowadays they can even go deeper than 100 meters to collect them, which is really insane, just to collect fragments of corals to be able to sell them. So it's really hard to find areas where you have colonies bigger than 40, 50 centimeters. which you can imagine is like almost 50 years old. So now you have only small pieces of red coral most of the time in the Mediterranean Sea, at least at shallow depth. It's really hard to study the ones very deep because it can grow to like 200 meters, even deeper.
Can you tell us a little bit of the current conservation status of these corals? Are there any recovery plans in place?
Yes, so the red coral at the moment is considered as an endangered species. So it's not the maximum level of danger. There's a red list that's established with different levels. So endangered is still alarming. The problem is because it can reproduce quite in a fast rate. So you find lots of little small pieces. That's what we talked about. And to be able to conserve this species, scientists have been trying to implement more rules and push with governments to forbid or really control the harvesting of this coral. So now it's only legal to harvest it through scuba diving, but it's still, people still manage to go very deep to harvest it. So people are pushing to also make it regulations for commercial laws to make it very hard to be able to sell it or things like this. But it's been going on for years. So it's really hard. It's something that's hard to regulate more than fish or, for example, really rare bird species, because it's underneath the surface, no one sees it. So it's really hard to push for rules and explain to people that this species is highly important. It creates underwater marine forest. It's a habitat for fish and for all the Mediterranean Sea. Scientists have trying to do lots of transportation techniques as well to be able to plant it again. So all this is going on.
Well, it's good that there is an effort, but hopefully there are going to be regulations so it can be better conserved.
Yes.
Red corals are classified as cold water corals. And when we say corals in Italy, it might be surprising to some listeners, since most people associate corals with tropical waters, which the Mediterranean is most certainly not. What's the difference between cold water and warm water corals?
Yes, warm corals are the ones we all imagine or picture when we think of corals. It's those very colorful, tropical, beautiful reefs with lots of fish. But there is lots of corals all over the world, and not necessarily in warm waters, and that's why we call them cold water corals. And the main difference is how they are built inside. So warm corals eat in very different ways. They can eat with their mouth. So all corals are animals, and they have lots of little mouth that they can use to eat. But they also rely on other mechanisms. But cold water corals really only rely on eating with their mouth, and they don't have other mechanisms that make it work. And they also are present very, very deep. So hot corals, warm water corals, we can only find them where there is high temperature and where the sun is shining, and when they can grow with the sun. So it makes the area very, very small. So it's only true around the tropics and in the first 100 meters of the ocean, even a bit deeper, 140. But cold water corals can grow to thousands and thousands of meters depth, which is really interesting because it really shows that there's a whole world under there that we don't know. And most of them can only grow even after maybe 30, 40 meters. So there's lots of cold water corals that we don't know of. But in the Mediterranean Sea, we can see cold water corals, hard ones, and soft ones like coralguardians, at shallow depths and also deep depths.
Yeah, and they are also very beautiful and colorful. So it's not true that the Mediterranean Sea is just beige. There are also a lot of colorful things. You just have to know where to look.
Yes, for example, so in Spain we have a project where we restore cold water coral, and it's a beautiful orange coral.
Yeah.
wonderful one.
Yeah. Everyone can go to our website and watch the film on sceneblue.org. I made a film about them a couple years ago. And then donate to the organization because they're doing really good work.
Thank you.
There are many different kinds of corals besides just the differentiation of cold water and warm water corals. There are soft corals and hard corals, really colorful ones, and some more beigey or brown. Some that do not look like most people would imagine a coral. What are the differences in how they are built and how they live? I have some photos here that I've taken over the years to take a look and explore some of the coral species a bit better. So here we have branching corals.
Yes, in the middle, yes. So corals are mostly divided in, like you said, soft and hard. And hard corals, like the branching corals we see here, it's that they have a hard skeleton, like us, technically, like humans. So it makes them unique because they're the ones who build the coral reefs. So they're reef building corals because when they die, they just become a rock made of their skeleton. So their skeleton is made of calcareous material. So when they die, they just build a rock and then other corals can grow on it. And then over time, that's how coral reefs are built. And the hard corals are full of little mouth polyps that then grow in this hard skeleton.
So this is a recent photo I've taken of table corals in the Maldives. And sadly, they are not looking all too good. It was a really hot summer last year, and yeah, a lot of corals died there.
Yes, so as we see, they're not colorful, and most of them actually like completely brown like a rock, and that's how when you see that a coral died, there's no life, there's nothing. It's just, even you don't see any structure, it's mostly then very flat, and or it's a rock, it's dead. So table corals are also hard corals, and only hard corals become like this when they die, because soft corals, they have a completely soft skeleton. So when they die, they just disappear. they don't leave anything behind, and they move with the water as well. That's hence the name soft coral.
Do they usually have a color when they're alive, or are they also kind of like this color?
The
Table
soft corals?
These ones? The
table corals?
Yeah.
Yeah. They can be so many different colors. They can be pink, purple, green, brown, beige, yellow. They can really be so pretty.
And here I have a brain coral.
Yes, it's a hard coral, and well, it gets the name from the shape. So on the opposite of branching corals, the skeleton really grows like a tree. Brain corals, they grow more like a ball, like a sphere, and then it grows really very, very, very slow. So some of them just go a few millimeters per year, and they take more and more space, like a small little ball to a big ball. And the pattern, the mouth and polyps are really hidden between the ridges, and it has this beautiful brain shape.
Wow, so the big ones must be really old then if they grow so slow. That's amazing.
Yes.
And here I have a photo of free living mushroom corals where I didn't even know it was a coral until I read a book about corals and found out that actually is also a coral.
Yes. It looks very funny. No one thinks of it, but it does have one animal. So most corals normally are colonies of polyps. So many animals living together and eating and building the skeleton. But for mushroom corals, so it's just one polyp. So it's this disc, this round shape with the mouth in the center, as we can see in the picture. Yeah. And then all the lines we see coming out of the mouth, and there's tentacles hidden between each line. So sometimes you can see the tentacles coming out of it, but it's very interesting. If it's upside down, it can take out the tentacles and turn itself on the other way. Takes a long time. But yes, it's hard corals. So one of the rare hard corals with only one polyp. So not a colony of animals.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And with the mouth in the middle, it reminds me a bit of a sea urchin.
Yeah, completely. Or like a sea anemone.
Yeah. And here I've taken in the Red Sea leafy corals.
Yes, leafy corals or lettuce foliose corals, people call them very different names. It's because it really has the shapes like waves, and it can really take any shape you want, just thin plates moving around, and they can grow really big. It's a nice area for fish to hide and to play around, and it's a good component of reefs to start building the reef, and then other things can grow on it as well.
Are they also growing really slowly, or are they growing a bit faster?
They grow a bit faster than the big massive corals, the round ones, but they grow so slower than branching corals, the ones we saw at the beginning.
And here I have a photo of a soft coral.
Yes, they look very funny, those ones. Sometimes you wonder what it is. Is it a sponge? Is it alive? Is it dead? Especially when it has this color, a bit gray color.
Yeah.
So that's a perfect example of a soft coral. It really it looks a bit like plastic sometimes, and like a fake thing, like a sponge. And it also has lots of little
It looks
polyps.
like pottery.
Yes, that's true.
Vase.
So it's also full of animals living together, but it doesn't have a hard skeleton. Their tissue is actually made of thousands of little tiny needles crossing each other. We call it sclerites, and that's what makes it be able to hold up and not fall, because it still gives it a structure that's still hard enough per se, but it's not hard.
Amazing. And you already shortly talked about gorgonia as well. Here we have one.
Yes, beautiful one. So gorgonians are closer to soft corals. It's part of the same big group. And so it's like soft corals, they don't have a hard skeleton. It's the main difference. But some of them, yes, I forgot to mention, the red coral one makes it also very special, is because it builds this hard structure that makes it hard, which is very unique for gorgonians, because normally gorgonians are completely soft, don't have a hard structure. And gorgonians are mostly found in temperate waters or also cold waters.
So this photo I've taken in the Indo-Pacific, but I've seen a gorgonia looking just like that in the Mediterranean Sea. I suppose it's not the exact same one, but it seems like they are in many different oceans, right?
So it's not the same species, but it's similar.
Okay. So from just like looking at it from a little further away, I would have said, okay, that looks the same to me.
Completely.
Okay, it is a gorgonia at least, both of them.
Yes.
One fascinating aspect of coral ecology is their symbiosis with zooanthellae, photosynthetic algae that lives with coral polyps. This relationship is vital for coral survival, but it also makes them vulnerable to bleaching. Could you explain how this relationship works and what happens during a bleaching event, and how corals even get their color?
Yeah, so zooxanthellae, it's this little algae. You can really imagine like a little round of algae. It's very, very small, microscopic, and it lives inside tropical and other types of corals. And it also gives the color to hot tropical corals. So it's also one of the main differences with cold water corals. Cold water corals usually don't have this algae, or if they do, they have it, but they don't rely on it so much, because this algae is there not just to give color. That's just a side benefit. It's mostly there because it sustains the food for corals. So tropical corals live in areas that are very poor in nutrients. Usually when you dive in tropical waters, it's very clear, you have nice visibility. That's why people like it as well. It's nice and warm. But then it also means there's not enough food for hard corals to eat. So hard corals in general are animals, and they need to eat nutrients that's in the water, little plankton, little fishes that float around. So there's not enough for hard corals to feed on in tropical waters. So they have this relationship with the algae, because during the day, the algae do photosynthesis. So it's like trees and plants on Earth, outside in a forest, but it happens underwater. So the algae takes the sunlight and converts it into food and energy in the coral. And it actually gives up to 99% of energy to the hard coral. So during the day only, of course. So without the algae, the coral will literally starve. It won't have enough food to survive, right? So at night it's okay because you got food during the day, and then at night it can still eat if it wants to eat with its mouth and with its tentacles. But during the day it depends a lot with this relationship. So that's why it's vital. And what happens is that when it gets too warm, or when the environment gets stressful for different reasons, so it can be temperature, but it can also be water pollution, or breaking corals, and then the coral is stressed. And what happens is that the algae also is stressed. So it's not only the animal, but it's also the algae inside. And then the algae starts producing unhealthy chemicals inside the coral instead of giving it benefits. So the coral actually kicks the algae out, expels it from its tissues instead of keeping it in, because it's not benefiting him. And then it becomes white. So that's what we call the bleaching event. That's what actually happens in the bleaching event, is that the algae left the coral, or more like the coral kicked the algae out. And it's bad, but it's not horrible, because it can still reverse. But then the coral loses at least half of its food source, and it has to stay like this until it can survive. So the algae is very important for the survival of tropical warm corals, at least. And some soft corals have the algae, some do not, and mostly cold water corals don't have it. So they get colors from just natural pigments in their tissues, like any other things on Earth, just pigments in the tissues. And that's also how other corals can get the color.
Mm-hmm. And as you said, when a coral bleaches, it doesn't necessarily mean it's dead. What are the chances of recovery after bleaching, and what environmental conditions need to change for corals to regain their health?
Yeah, so that's why I said it's not so bad, because it's just missing the algae and it's not dead, although it can die if environmental conditions stay stressful for the coral and the algae. So temperature too hot, or too much pollutions, and for the coral to gain the algae back and to not be stressed. So temperature has to drop to come back to a normal temperature. So as soon as the temperature is 1 degree, 1.5 degree too hot to what the coral can handle, that's when the problem comes. So if it can reduce to that, then it's okay. The coral will get back to normal. It will be slow. It will have to slow down maybe on growing. It would reduce maybe also reproduction, but at least it survives. But if the temperature continues to be very hot for several days or weeks even, then the coral can die if it's not strong enough to survive such a long time without the support of the algae.
When the media talks about coral bleaching, they often talk about reef building corals, so hard corals. How are soft corals and sea fans impacted by warming waters? In recent years, I've noticed more algae growing on corals and sea fans. What does this indicate about their health? I also have some photos here to visualize it.
So most of studies are done on hard corals. Unfortunately, more and more done on gorgonians and soft corals, but they are as well impacted by warming waters. For example, in the Mediterranean Sea, it got really warm the last years, and there has been a mass even bleaching event for some gorgonians, but as well as death events. So they all died because it was too warm. People said that the Mediterranean Sea was on fire. So they are impacted. And if it's not death or temperature, it can also be like you said. So algae can grow on it. And usually when algae grows on something, it means that the coral is either weak or in process of dying, which is really not a good sign, because then the algae, what does it completely overgrows the coral and then slowly takes over. So it's really not a good indicator about the health of the reef or of the gorgonian.
You've worked on projects that involve tourism and coral reefs. Could anthropogenic influences threaten corals more when they are already under stress of warming waters? Let's leave aside coral destruction because of destructive fishing methods like bottom trawling and dynamite fishing, as well as the collection for aquariums. Let's concentrate on pollution, whether from sewage or chemicals that might come from land, whether hotels, businesses, or local houses. Are there more diseases arising in corals due to these influences?
Yes, actually people don't know, but water pollution is the second biggest threat on coral reefs. The first one is climate change. And so water pollution is a direct effect from human uses, and it has an effect on the quality of water, which affects the corals. So there is studies happening to try to understand diseases in corals. So it's very common in the Caribbean Sea. There's lots of disease there with different names. So there's, for example, the white band disease, the black band disease. So it refers to what you can see on a coral. So usually it's a white band or a black band, and then slowly progress and kills the coral, or changes at least the bacteria that lives in them or that's around. It's like on our skin, for example. And some of them sometimes they recover, sometimes not. It's very still a mystery in science of actually what causes this disease and what impacts them and what makes them grow on a coral. But people definitely think that water quality has a huge impact on it. And it makes sense because it can develop more... it can create an imbalance of good bacteria, bad bacteria in the corals. And then also algae are going to compete on top, which can also evolve in making the coral weaker and then more prone to disease. Having toxic substances released in the water can also involve disease and hurt the coral. So yes, it's definitely... something that has an impact.
For tourists who want to dive or snorkel near reefs, what should they be aware of to minimize the impact? For instance, what products are safe to use on their skin and hair, and how should they behave underwater to avoid harming corals or stirring up sediment?
Yeah, tourism is a big aspect when we talk about coral reefs, because it's important for people to know what they are, to be able to also be aware of protecting them. If you want to do tourism activities in coral reefs, something very easy to put into place is to buy reef-friendly sunscreens already. So sunscreen is a big topic that's still on research. No sunscreen is 100% safe. That would be lying. But there's some sunscreens that are already much better than your conventional mainstream sunscreen that you find at big supermarkets or pharmacies. Lots of brands are existing now, small local brands, organic brands. So there's still no regulation exactly which components have to be avoided to have a reef-friendly stamp. It doesn't exist. But there's lots of resources online. If you Google which components to avoid, it's a big list of derivatives from petrol, for example, from plastic. And zinc is also good, but it's not 100% safe either, like I said. We read in a blog on our website on Coral Guardian. People can have a look if they want to, where we explain more in details. The best is also...
Yeah, I can link that.
Yes, thank you. The best is also to wear gloves instead of putting sunscreen. Is also best for you, for your skin. So using long sleeve lycras, or at least shoulder covered, and if you can also use it for your legs, like small little pants lycras that you can use for snorkeling or diving. So that's the best protection for your skin and for the reefs. That's for sure. And then always make sure that you're not stepping on corals. Then if you have fins, that you're not kicking them out with the tips of your fins. So that means to be comfortable in the water. So if you're in areas where you're by yourself, maybe ask around if you can have a guide. If you're not comfortable in the water, they can show you around and make you comfortable. Or take guided snorkels if you think it's better to make you feel good. And as a tourist is, always also tell people if you see people doing things. And it's always good to tell around, and try not to step too much with your feet on everything. As soon as you can put fins and swim, it's always best, and just walk at the very edge of the water.
Definitely also like the option of wearing UV clothes when swimming. Also have a sun allergy, so that helps even more. So if someone else also has a sun allergy, that's a good way to protect yourself and the water.
Yes.
And yeah, definitely. Also for divers, if you see like other divers poking at corals or putting reef hooks onto corals, tell them not to do that, or show them not to do that if you're underwater, and then talk with people about it. Because, we need to share the information. Knowledge is power and can help to save our environment a bit better.
Yes, definitely. And you never know, you might touch something that's toxic or that will hurt you. If you touch a fire coral, it's not nice, I can assure you.
Now that we have explored the diversity of corals and the stressors they face, let's shift to conservation. What methods are currently used to conserve coral reefs?
So one that's mostly used as what we do at Coral Guardian is restoration. So if you had a reef before that's been destroyed for different reasons, and then you want to restore it, so plant corals. So that's a very common way of being able to conserve coral reefs, because it's like planting trees in a forest. You plant more corals, and it actually quite easy in a way. It's not so easy, but you can just cut little pieces and implement and plant them somewhere with, of course, a strong method and a serious protocol. But you can plant different types of corals, and you always have to know what has destroyed your reefs. So it could have been destructive fishing, for example, or heavy pollution from fishing nets that's been laying around, or pollution from other sources. Is it also heavy use of humans by stepping on the reef? So first is to always identify the source of destruction, then try to limit it, restore your reef. And another way that's really important is to create protected areas, or marine protected areas, MPAs as we call them. And that's harder to do because it has to involve governments and local stakeholders, as well as fishermen or even tourists, because you have to put regulations to protect your reef. And when you have regulations, it means your reef is heavily protected and regulate on what can happen on the reef. And that's the biggest conservation measure we can create nowadays, is to protect as many reefs as we can, to at least preserve them from anthropogenic impacts.
You've worked on projects involving coral nurseries. How do these nurseries function and what roles do they play in reef restoration? You have sent me some pictures of you working on a coral nursery in Fiji. I'm gonna pull them up and maybe you can tell us also a little bit of what you did there. I assumed you were diving down there with coral fragments, but you can tell me what's really going on here.
Yes. So on that picture, it's me in Fiji, and in the basket, it's to put the coral pieces and fragments to bring them into the nursery. So to make sure that then they will be not hurt, because you need enough space to make them. Sorry, but the nursery is to in Fiji. I did a research project, and it's still on at the moment, and it's to study the impact of a shark dive on the coral reef there, and more specifically on the corals themselves. So that's why I implement those little nurseries. So it's really a small nursery, so it's because it was really for research. But nurseries are a really great tool, because then you can put corals and they can grow on the nursery structure. That can be in very different ways. There in Fiji, with what we had on hand, I used metal and as well as PVC to be able to put the corals in it, because the goal is to be able to take them out and then to measure their growth through time. And to do that, I just weigh them on a scale like human beings, but little coral pieces. And that's why I have this tray and this table, so I can take the corals in and out and weigh them. So the nurseries here are a growing station for the project, for the research.
Amazing. And I think it was this picture where I saw the shark in the background. Yes. For shark diving, you said. I can see you're just chilling out over the corals, and if there's just a shark behind you.
Yeah, it's my friend. I know them. So it's in that picture, I'm collecting data on the state of the reef. So the line we see in the middle, it's a tape with measures, and every 15 centimeters, for example, then I write down what I see on the reef. And in the background, you can see one of the little bull sharks that hangs around. Sometimes, but it was just one. It was just coming to look out what was happening, and then it just left.
Okay. Is that the tape you used there, the measuring tape?
Yes, it's so you lay down on the coral reef, on the substrate, very close. You have to be very careful to not break anything. And then I write down, for example, oh, it's a table coral. Oh, it's an acid coral. Oh, it's algae. Oh, it's a soft coral. And that's the white sheet that we see is me writing down on the water.
Are there other kinds of nurseries as well? Well, here we have a picture of coralguardian in Indonesia.
Yes. So in Fiji, we saw nurseries that are used for research, but at coralguardian and most normally nurseries also used to restore the reef. And it can be a step either before you plant the coral, or just really a structure to put the corals to grow in. So in Indonesia, here in the picture, we can see corals being attached with metal wire. So because we really want to avoid plastic, and to a metal table, so a metal nursery. And then that is put, so all it happens underwater to not stress the corals. And then it's put a bit deeper in the restoration area. And then the corals grow and they stay on it. And then it rebuilds a whole reef that was completely destroyed by dynamite fishing. So the idea, the whole main reason of using those tables in Indonesia, it was because there was no more hard substrate, a structure that corals could grow on. So that's why we had to build nurseries out of metal to put the corals in, and they would be stable over time. And then really the corals will overgrow it and then create a new reef.
So they are really staying there, those corals. It's not just for a nursery, but it's actually then the new place where they're growing.
Exactly. This one is a nursery that stays a nursery all the time. I mean, that develops in a coral reef.
Into a reef.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. So there's a lot of dynamite fishing going on in Indonesia.
Yes, unfortunately, even though it is illegal now, dynamite fishing or blast fishing is really widespread through the Philippines, Indonesia, mostly Southeast Asia, because it's an easy way to be able to get fish for local communities, and people usually don't know better or the damage that it does and how bad it can impact the overall ecosystem. And that's why there in Indonesia we work with local people, and it's fishermen, it's old fishermen or families of fishermen that plant the corals with us. So it's we have a team of 5 of them that do the whole work and plant the corals, and then they also talk about it to the people in the villages, and it's really a project that's been fully accepted and known by people in the region. And the reef has been so much better, so much fish, at least 20 more fish has been brought back to the reef, and the reef looks wonderful.
That's amazing to hear. That the locals now see how they can do better, and then also see what impact it had, because they're doing this great work. That's really amazing to hear.
Yes.
And here we have the nursery in Punta de la Mona in Spain.
Yes.
With collaboration of Coral Soul. That one I know. I was there.
This one you saw. Yes, another nursery also made of metal, but there the purpose is completely different. The corals do not stay in the nursery. So this one really has the goal of what a nursery means. So it's like a little hospital. The corals are collected from pollution of fishing nets or fishing materials that have been entangled around the coral colonies, cut them, wound them. So then the whole team in Spain, which is an amazing team, dives down, which is quite deep because it's between 30 and 40 meters. So it's quite technical dives with lots of current. Bad visibility sometimes, can be quite cold because it's in the Mediterranean Sea. And it's a cold water coral that's almost endemic to the Mediterranean Sea. And it's a beautiful chandelier coral, that's how people call it, and completely orange, that gets hurt. So they collect the fragments and they put them in the nursery, the goal is to make them healthy again. So they take care of brushing them if there is, for example, a sponge growing, or they take care of taking out that sponge, or if there's algae, or if they have cuts, then they stay in the nursery until they get healthier, better, and then they get out of the nursery and are planted in the reef nearby.
Yeah. It was really amazing to dive there and see all the fish like we see in the picture now as well, just around the corals, and the passion of all the volunteers that brushed them. I did a couple of dives with them, and it was really amazing to see, and also all the life around it, like in the whole area. It was really such a beautiful dive. I think I dove a lot in the Mediterranean, and that was really one of my favorite dive sites, and such a great project.
Yeah, that's what everyone say when they dive there. It's such a unique marine environment, and it's officially protected now.
That's amazing. Here we also have a before and after picture, as you said, with the fishing gear on the before picture, and then after beautiful, healthy coral.
Yes, the whole goal of this project is also to clean the whole area and to take out tons and tons of pollution wastes. And they managed, and now it's to restore everything, to put corals back into shape. So it's an amazing project, and fish are coming back. We are seeing between 2 and 3 times more fish in the areas that have been cleaned and restored.
Amazing. And here we also have from our Coral Guardian project, before and after. Where was that?
This one is in Indonesia. So completely broken by dynamite fishing, and then the corals, the colorful corals we see underneath are the ones grown from the tables. So underneath that, it's tables.
That's cool. I wouldn't have thought that if I just look at the picture. I didn't imagine there's the nursery table underneath that, but that's really cool.
They completely take over everything, and it would have been impossible without tables because, as you can see before, there was no place for corals to grow.
Yeah.
Everything was destroyed.
Since coral are animals, does taking the fragments for restoration cause them pain? Have there been any studies on this?
We get this question so often. So corals are animals, that's true. But they have a very simple nervous system. It's not complex like us at all. They don't have what we call nociceptors. So they have a nervous system that allows them to sense if something is passing by, so they can close and open their polyps. But nothing has ever shown that they feel pain as we imagine pain to be, as we identify pain to be. They do react to risks and threats. For example, if you cut a piece of them or you fragment them, they can release what we call a mucus. So it's a natural protection. It's like a bit slimy. Some of them can release more than others. So that's automatic natural reaction to this. But to say they feel pain, I think it's to elaborate at least how we say pain is.
And I also have footage of you here at work. Maybe you can explain also what you were doing in this short little video.
Oh, yes. So, yes, I'm preparing all the tables that we saw at the nursery. So we had to do everything from start, from zero, from scratch. And we have to cut all the materials to then create a nursery. So when you're in remote places like this, it's something people often forget. It's hard to get the materials, so you need to make everything yourself. And then there is no laboratory or things to make things quicker. So nailing down things yourself to be able to have a tag on the name of your coral, for example, to put your coral piece on there. Everything takes much more time.
But it looks you're having a good handle on all the building stuff.
Yes, I got also good help from the locals.
That's great. And how is it decided whether corals are grown in tanks or in ocean nurseries before being transplanted back onto the reefs? If they're transplanted back, as we learned, they can also stay on nurseries.
Yes. So most coral restoration projects do not happen in very fancy places with a lab, and they don't have access to aquariums or inland nurseries, so where you can put them inland. So that's why it's very expensive to have this. So most people have underwater nurseries like we just saw. And what the goal to make a nursery is to allow to keep the corals in their most vulnerable stages in a confined, controlled environment. So when you put coral in the nurseries, it's because you cut a little piece from a main colony and you want to plant them. So they're still small, they've been taken out, they might be a bit stressed. So you put them in a nursery so they de-stress and they get okay and they start growing again, and then they're good, and then you can put them back in the water, in the environment you want them to grow in. So when you can have an inland nursery where everything's controlled in a lab, very fancy, very technical, it's much easier. But when you're with local projects like what we do at Coral Guardian, you have to make sure that you have nurseries in a place that there is very low temperature changes, or that you can control the protection so people won't come around and maybe hurt them. And then there is also not much contamination from water or sedimentation. So having a nursery is still, it's more work than we think of. You still have to make sure that the corals can grow good in the nursery and get back into normal state after their vulnerability that they've been to because you cut little pieces of them.
Mm-hmm. What techniques are used to outplant corals onto degraded reefs? I remember seeing eco-friendly epoxy resin being used by Coral Soul in collaboration with Coral Guardian and Punta de la Mona. Is this the standard method everywhere for all types of corals?
So yes, in Spain we use what is called bioepoxy. So it's a natural, non-toxic glue resin that you can use, and this is very common for in the Mediterranean Sea. It's also a bit more expensive, so if you can't have that, other people use other methods. So in Indonesia, as you saw, we just use metal wires to attach them to the structure, so you can use this. Other people have a method of using marine cement, mixing with sand and water. That's very used a lot in lots of projects because it's quite easy to acquire and it's cheap. So you make cement balls and then you use that as a glue and you put the coral on top, and then it gets hard and the coral grows in cement. And cement is also a good surface usually to have other things growing on top of it. I know some people have tried to use, for example, bamboo structures or other natural materials, but there's been also a lot of research. We also at Coral Guardian, we also do lots of research on that to be able to know what can be used and avoid as much as possible non-natural materials.
What different coral species are usually restored, and why are some restored and others not? Hard corals are primary reef-building corals, whereas soft corals do not build reefs but are also present at reefs, and both of them rely on zooxanthellae for energy. I'm sorry if I butchered that. So both can bleach, to my understanding. And I saw research from Lord Howe Island from 2022 in Australia that suggested that soft corals overall survive the bleaching event. They're better than hard corals, so soft corals often can supplement their diet by filter feeding, which can help them survive bleaching events better. When hearing about coral restoration and conservation, it's mostly talked about stony corals though. How are soft corals conserved, and also are there some hard corals that are more conserved than others?
Okay, lots of things. So first off, so soft corals can have zooxanthellae, but they do not rely on it like hard corals, but they can also bleach. That's true. And the study you've mentioned is part of the very few studies that are done on soft corals. It's really like a niche and underrated, and people don't look at soft corals as much as hard corals, but they do bleach, and there are projects that try to focus on them. You can transplant them, cut little pieces, and then make them grow. It's just a bit harder because they're completely soft. But some projects exist, but it's way more underrated, and it's not as famous as hard corals because they also don't build reefs. So they're a bit, I don't want to say they're not important, but they have a less impact on the structure of the reefs. As for when you want to transplant and restore hard reefs, coral reefs, usually what people choose is to take a coral that's easy to handle and to work with. So usually it's the coral that we call acropora. So it's the branching type that we saw earlier. It's the ones that grow very fast. So they can grow until, for example, some of the fastest ones grow to up 10 centimeters a year, 8 to 10. Some it's more like 5, but they grow very fast. So in just 1 year, you can already have a big impact and effect on the natural environment. And it's branches, so it's quite easy to cut pieces and to put the pieces somewhere else. So usually in local structures that don't have much financing or ways to do it, that's a very easy coral that you can do. And it's also very widespread. It's one of the main corals that you can find. But unfortunately, it's also the one that's most fragile and impacted by climate change and bleaching. So that's when you do restoration, it's always important to try to involve different species of corals, because if you only do acropora and they are bleached, then your whole restoration project is impacted. And now people are doing and trying to put different genera of corals. So you also have other branching corals that are not acropora that might grow slower, like Posiropora, and then you can also transplant them. And then people have also try working with massive corals, so those round corals, but this is harder because, well, they're round and they're quite hard to handle and also to break, to cut pieces. So that's been done mostly in technical ways, in labs or facilities that have access to these techniques, which is microfragmentation. So you have like a little saw, very, very small and very precise, that you can cut corals with. And it's very nice for massive corals because then you can cut it very precisely. You can put it on a flat structure and then it will grow and then you can plant it again. But so mostly people plant what they can have around them and what's easy. And then when you go a bit more technical, it's always good to plant different species. And massive corals are hard to transplant if you don't have much techniques available. But there are branching corals, or the leafy corals that we mentioned, for example, you can also transplant them. It's easier than the massive ones. So yeah, the best is to transplant different species.
Yeah, that's great. And as we said earlier a little bit, what effect would restoring water quality in coastal areas have? Because it seems critical for coral recovery. What steps need to be taken to improve water quality for coral reefs?
Yeah, so most of it is due to human impact, human use. So a big thing we can change is how water is treated in cities and by human usage. So sewage water in a lot of places, more than we think of, is not treated and goes directly into the ocean or into rivers that end up in the ocean. And that's up to governments to make laws and to provide treatment for water. But it's also us that can have an impact if we try to use more ocean-friendly products to wash our homes, for example, or to our showers, shampoos, soaps, it's always better to try to buy organic ones with the most natural ingredients as possible. As soon as it's very chemical, it has a bad impact in the water, and it's also harder to treat it. So all this is something we can do as individuals. And then there's also pollution coming from agricultural runoff. So people using lots of pesticides or fertilizer. It goes into the soil and can end up in the water in the ocean as well. Basically, we're mostly disconnected from this, but even a farm very far away from the ocean will have an impact one day on it, because the water will go into the river sometime and then end up in the ocean somehow one day. And all this is also good for us, because we need drinking water, and having a good water coming from your tap, if you're lucky enough to have drinking water from tap where you live, it's also very important. And as well as if you are tourists, it's always good to go to places where you know they are aware of this and try to use eco-friendly products for their water system, or they have a water system treatment where they don't dump everything in the water, especially if you go to coral reef tourism structures in isolated places, isolated islands. If you can choose places where they know they treat water, it's always a good thing to do.
Are there any technological advances aiding coral conservation efforts?
Yes, people are trying to do so many things. It's insane. Especially with AI coming up and evolving a lot. Something I find very interesting, for example, that's very technical, is focusing on the sound of reefs. So nowadays, to know if a reef is healthy, we usually have to look with our eyes and do measures, pictures, or stay and count the fish, see the corals. But people are developing amazing ways to measure how healthy a reef is and to know how many species are in there just by listening to the sound of it. So the more a reef is healthy, the louder it is, and each animal has a specific sound, so you can even trace up which animal is present thanks to the sound. And this, of course, you need to get the material to record underwater, but then it would effective ways to know if a reef has to be protected, if it's degraded or not. And this also helps to conservation efforts, because then you know, okay, this reef needs protection, or this reef is really healthy and we've managed to do this. Other technical advances is underwater cameras always evolving, and then you can picture better content, and also for research. And platforms that want to be collaborative, where you can share data on how your reef is, or NGOs that share ways to share pictures of your reef. All this is, I think, efforts that contribute.
Sounds great. And if someone wants to help conserve corals, what actions would you recommend?
First, I would recommend to support NGOs that do the work. For example, at Coral Guardian, you can support us by adopting corals in our project. So the money goes directly to the projects and to us, and to keep restoring and protecting reefs. So supporting NGOs as you can, if it's giving from your free time or donating money to projects, or as well talking to people about corals. If you think you know a bit about corals and one day you want to talk to people about it, oh, did you know corals are animals, they need protection, and they're very important. They host marine life, and we need them actually to be able to eat fish. And talking to people, donating to NGOs, making awareness, it's the big topics that you can do to help conserve corals, that's for sure, and sharing information as much as you can. And if you're a diver, If you have pictures that are interesting of bleaching corals or corals looking weird, you can always send them maybe to scientists or to NGOs and asking them if they ever saw this. Just sharing anything you have and choosing eco-touristic operations instead of mass touristic ones.
We're already at the last question. For anyone inspiring to become a marine conservationist specializing in corals, what advice would you give them?
Well, I would give them to hold tight and not give up if it's a dream and a passion, because it is not an easy field. It is not a field where there is lots of money, unfortunately. So you have to be strong, that's for sure, and passionate. And I would also advise to talk to as many people as you can and not be afraid of leaving the place you know, and maybe explore around, even if it's in Europe or the other countries, because marine life is everywhere and there's lots of opportunities at different places.
Thanks so much for your advice, and thanks so much to giving an introduction in the amazing world of corals. It was really interesting. Definitely eager to learn even more now. And yeah, I hope to talk with you soon again about another coral restoration and success. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sabine. Thank you, everyone, for listening.